I didn't anticipate that we were going to have the war with Russia, but I did anticipate that we were likely headed in a war-like environment. It's very much fell with as expected there. So let's take the existing situation. The United States has a lot of debt and it has deficits. So it has to sell debt. Now, if you say, and others are holding debt, and if you say, how do you get healthy? You have to spend less than you earn to not borrow money and get financially strong. That's difficult, and particularly when you have a lot of debt, because you have to take a portion of your income and you have to pay the debt. And also you're living in spending more than you're earning. And so how do you rectify that? What, cut spending? I mean, it's very difficult to cut spending. Or raise income? Well, that's not easy. So cut spending? What do you cut? Okay. So we're living in a world now where policymakers don't think, how much money do I have to spend and what should I prioritize it on? They think, how much money do I need to spend without regard to how much they have? And then they go spend it, and then they have deficits that central banks can print. It's just like the same as individuals. They have the deficit, but in their case, they have the capacity to print the money to pay the deficit. So it's not easy to fix the financial problem. People have big differences in values and conditions, and so it's very difficult to bring them together to deal with the problems. And the same is true internationally. If you're holding a debt instrument and a cash paying instrument and it gives you a 2% interest and you have a 5 or 6% inflation, you lose money at 3% a year. So you have to look at that in real dollars, and you have to hold that portfolio in a way that is balanced to any kind of economic environment. And then the way I do it, I didn't have anything. And then I start to acquire money and I start to think, how many weeks do I have, months do I have, or years that I'm financially safe? And what do I hold it in? So, and then, once you got that taken care of, you can go beyond it. And I wanted it in a very well balanced portfolio, that type of portfolio that does equally well no matter what happens. There are basically two big influences on markets: the growth rate and the inflation rate. Like if you know that growth is going to be faster than expected and inflation is going to be higher than expected, or that bonds are going to go down. And so the way I give that as an example, so there are 4 quadrants that I think of: rising growth, rising inflation, and falling inflation. And I want to have a portfolio that will be 25% of my risk in each one of those so that I don't have any bias. And so I pick the assets that are going to do well in each of those 4 quadrants, and I hold them in a balanced way. And I tested that, going back actually to 1900 and so on. You'll actually increase your buying power. And so that's the kind of thing that I think in the beginning. And then when I go beyond that, then I'll take more risk. But I think that being safe, particularly in this kind of an environment, is important. And I would take a perspective of how to do that that's like the one I'm just describing. If the growth is less than expected and inflation's less than expected, you would like to own bonds. Okay, if inflation is higher than expected, you would want to own assets such as commodities and gold and inflation index bonds. If growth is faster than expected, particularly if inflation is less than expected, you'd want to own. The state of Connecticut is usually number 1, 2, or 3 in the richest state in the country, but 22% out of the last survey, 22% of the high school students in Connecticut have either dropped out of high school or have absentee rates of greater than 25% and are in failing classes. And there's a great deal of poverty and the breakup of the families and the guidance. So we operate philanthropically, and I'll give you an example. There was COVID, and the kids have to get educated. And 60,000 kids didn't have computers or connectivity, and no government was going to do anything about it. So, we had to buy 60,000 computers to give it to kids in order for them to have education. Well, and there's hunger, and there's poverty and there's drugs. Education is a state issue by the Constitution. So I live in Greenwich, Connecticut, which is it's a rich town. And the public education gets about $24,000 per student. Last number I looked, it's probably higher than that now. On the road at Bridgeport, Connecticut, 10 minutes up the road, they get $14,000 a student because there's no tax base. And they need more money because, the expenses of raising a kid you also have to get them the computer, you've got to get them the food, the clothes, all of those things. If you earn a lot of money, you can afford to take care of your kids' education. You can raise them in a better way. If you don't earn a lot of money, you don't have that privilege. So all through history, during those such times, wealth gaps have increased. Some people make a lot of money, others don't. And it also increases the level of indebtedness. And you make the turn of the century, then you see big conflicts over wealth. Everyone has a different nature. So you want to know what your nature is, what your pull is going for. See the whole thing, gain perspective, understand where you are in the life cycle. There's a life cycle, from birth to death. And let's say on average, it lasts about 80 years. And you know that at different parts in that cycle, certain things are going to happen. You're going to, first third of it, you're going to be dependent on others and you're learning. Second third of it, you're going to be independent of your parents and so on. And others will become dependent on you and you're working to be successful. At the various ages, you get married, you have kids, there's a life cycle. That happens over and over again. The main thing, is being strong, smart, capable, and adaptable. But that's why I put out these, videos and books to try to help people understand that.